In today's video, we are going to be unboxing, building and testing the Geeetech Acrylic Prusa 3D Printer DIY Kit. A 3D printer available on Amazon for £189. It is an acrylic framed unit and is rated 5-star in the review section. It also has a compatible auto level sensor, however this is a separate purchase item. The printer has a 200 by 200 by 180mm build area and a 0.3mm nozzle head. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the printer ships in this box, and when we take a look inside, we have two packing layers. The topmost layer contains the acrylic frame, and the bottom layer contains the motors and other mechanical parts of the printer. There is a parts list included in the pack, but there are no assembly instructions, which is rather scary when you first start out, but there are plenty of online resources available to help you through the build process. Hopefully this video will become one of those resources. There are other items you will need to purchase when using the printer. Of course, the most important is the filament. This printer uses a 1.75mm filament. I purchased a spool for just over £17. You also need glue sticks to rub on the glass build platform to stop the models from sticking. Isopropyl alcohol for cleaning the build plate, and I recommend buying disposable gloves for when you're using the alcohol, as it is 99% proof. A good scraper for lifting the models off the build plate, and a good pair of side cutters for trimming off the excess plastic. So let's get started on the build. Before you start to do any assembly, it's probably best to lay out the pieces of the acrylic frame and the screws and just check them off the parts list just to make sure everything's there. As you can see, I've already done this. And as you can see, there are a lot of small bags of screws and nuts and washers, so best to leave them in the bags as they're numbered, and you can just keep referring to the parts list as you need pieces. And I'll be giving a full list of parts needed for each stage, and I highly recommend you getting a magnetic screw dish just to make sure that you don't lose any screws while you're building. For the first stage, you're going to need the following parts: 2 times 450mm threaded rods, 2 times acrylic parts marked A14, 8 M10 washers, 6 M10 spring washers, 8 times M10 nuts, 2 times 410mm smooth rods, and 4 linear bearings LM8UU. Okay, so the first stage, you need to take one of your threaded rods, feed an acrylic part A14 to the center, take an M10 washer, an M10 spring washer, and an M10 nut, and screw that onto the threaded rod. Take another M10 nut and thread that about 1.5 inches onto the threaded rod. Then you want a spring washer and an M10 ordinary washer, and on the other side take an M10 washer into the middle, take an M10 nut, you want to tighten that all the way to the middle. Take another M10 nut, and again just about 1.5 inches down the threaded rod, another spring washer, and finally a washer. And there you have the completed rod. As you can see, in the middle you have the acrylic piece, spring washer on one side with the M10 washer, M10 washer on the other side. They're both kept in place by bolts, and on either end you have a nut, spring washer and a washer. You want to repeat that for the second threaded rod, so we'll go ahead and do that. And there we have the two completed rods. Now for the next part, we take a smooth rod and just place two linear bearings on it and repeat it for the final rod. So there we have our 4 completed rods, and that's stage 1 complete. For the next stage you'll need acrylic pieces A09, A10, A11 and A12, 2 times locking rings, 4 times M10 washers, 4 times M10 nuts, and the 4 previously assembled rods. Okay, so we now have the parts that we need spread out in front of us. The first thing we need to do is place a locking ring on one end of the smooth rods, like so, and our threaded rods, you can see the end with the spring washer and the normal washer in the middle goes towards acrylic pieces 11 and 12, 12 being the outermost one, and as you can see you can line them up so that the holes are matching. And what we want to do is thread the threaded rods through the bottom holes like so, and secure them with a washer, an M10 bolt. For the time being, leave them quite loose because you'll need to do some adjustments later on. And again on the other side, a washer and an M10 bolt. Then you need to take your smooth rod with the locking ring end through the front like that, and you want to try and get it as level as you can with the front edge of the acrylic. Bring up the locking nut. Now you do get supplied 2 Allen keys in the kit, but I found one was too small and one was too big, so I'm using my own 2mm Allen key. And basically what you want to do is just tighten it up and repeat on the other side. So push it through, move it back level, move up the locking ring, and tighten in place. Okay, so that's the front side done. Now, as you can see, we have pieces 0, 9 and 10. Again, line up the holes, and you'll notice that on this side, the hole on 0, 10 goes all the way through, but there's no corresponding top hole on 0, 9. So what you want to do is, again, slide the threaded rods through. And you want to seat the smooth rods in the top holes, and then you want to just bring it so that the end of the smooth rod is hitting the front of 0, 9, and again on the other side. Just keep adjusting until you've got it flush on this side and fully seated on this side, and then you can go ahead and just finger tighten and then do exactly the same on the back side. Put a washer and a bolt. Tighten it up finger tight. And tighten up the front. And last but not least, do this corner. Again, tighten it up until the smooth rods completely seated. Again, finger tight, and there you can see on the front we have two smooth rods are flush. Just finished tightening that up. We have the flush smooth rods at the front, done up with M10 nuts there, and on the back you can see smooth rods are seated fully in, and again just finger tight the bolts. It does take a bit of adjusting, so but you want to try and keep the frame as square as you can. Just keep tightening up until everything's together. And that's stage 2 done. So that's our Y-axis frame all put together, and we can now move on to stage 3. Putting aside the frame for the time being, we can move on to the next stage, and for that you'll need 1 times pulley bracket, 1 times M3 times 20mm screw, 1 drive bearing and 2 wheel nut bearings, 1 M4 times 25mm screw, and 1 M4 lock nut. First of all, you want to take the pulley bracket, which is this U-shaped metal piece here, and take M3 screw and place that through the hole in the bracket at the back. Once again, you're going to be using the 2mm Allen key to get that started, and then you can just bring it so it's seated all the way like that. Then you want to take the pulley wheel and insert a bearing in each side like that. Place that between the arms of the bracket. Take M4 screw, pass that through, take the locking nut, place that on there like that. Then you want to take your Allen key, which you got, the big one which you got in the kit, just place that in there. Take a pair of pliers to just hold the nut in place. And then you can tighten up the lock nut. Because it is a lock nut, you're not going to have to do it up fully, just enough to keep the screw in place, but not enough to actually put too much pressure on the two arms, which will trap the pulley wheel. So once you've tightened that up, you want to check that the pulley is still freewheeling. If it's not, just loosen up. Loosen up a little bit, and then just make sure that it's freewheeling. If you're finding it's a little bit tight, then just get yourself a large pry bar or a screwdriver, and just give that a quick bend, only very slightly, just so you can feel the wheel turning. And that's stage 3. Put that somewhere safe for the time being, and we can move on to the next stage. For the next stage, you're going to need a motor, an acrylic piece A13, 1 times pulley, 3 times M3 by 12mm screws, 5 times M3 washers, 2 times M3 16mm screws, 2 times M3 square nuts, and the previously assembled Y-axis frame. Okay, so we've got the parts we need in front of us. The first thing you want to do is take the motor and just unplug the cable, just to make life a little bit easier. Put that to one side, out of the way. Now if we take a look at the motor, we can see that the spindle has a flat edge, and the first thing you're going to want to do is fit the pulley onto the spindle. As you can see, the pulley has 2 grub screws that attach it to the spindle, so you want to align them as much as you can with the flat edge of the spindle. take a 1mm Allen key. What you want to do is align the pulley and the top of the spindle so that they're flush, and just tighten up the grub screws. Like so. And you can see that it's securely fitted on there and spins with the spindle. The next part is to take the acrylic part A13, and this needs to be aligned in a certain way. So take your motor and turn it so that the cable socket is to the left, place it on the desk, then take the acrylic part and with the long arm place that on the so that the long arm is pointing towards the cable clip. Now we just need to secure that with 3 M3 screws. So we'll just put them in finger tight for now. Put the second one in there, and finally secure it with a third one like so. Now when you're tightening up these screws, you don't want to go too tight because you might risk cracking the acrylic part. So just tighten them up, give them a little bit more torque. You'll feel them go tight, and once they do, just give it a little bit more, just make sure they're secure. And once they're in place, that's how the motor should look. And now you need to fit that into our wire. Remember, the front here there's a slot in the back and a smaller hole at the front with 2 screw holes. So you want to take your motor, slide that into the back there, and you can see that it's now flush with the front here. But before you do that, to secure it you need 2 M3 square nuts, and they slot in those little recesses there. I don't know if you can see, you can just about see it there. So slot them in, and then you want to place it very carefully in. Now these can take a little bit of jiggling about to get into the square bolts, and you want to use the last 2 M2 bolts in order to secure it in place, making sure that the square nuts don't come out. And then you want to just take your your Allen key and just give those screws a good tighten. and make sure it's nice and secure. That's the first motor fitted to the frame. The final part of this section is the idler roller, which fits in the recess cut in the acrylic piece there, and on the back there's a screw hole, so just feed that through and you'll see the frame of the idler roller fits nicely into the recess. Take an M3 wing nut and just tighten that up. And you can see you have the wing nut on the outside and the idler roller is fitted snugly on the inside. And that's this part complete. For the next part, you're going to need 1 times acrylic part A15, 4 times acrylic part A16, 4 times zip ties, 1 times belt mount, 2 times M3 times 10mm screws, 8 times M3 by 20mm screws, 8 times M3 nuts, 10 times M3 washers, and the previously assembled Y-axis frame. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is take the belt mount. You can see it has a screw hole on either side and 2 on the top. You want to take the 2 on the top, take the M3 by 10 with a washer, pass that through the acrylic piece, like so. Take the second M3 by 10, again with the washer, screw it into place, and just tighten it up with the Allen key. And then you have that fitted to the bottom of the build plate. And then when you want to pass one of the M3 by 20s through, as you can see on here, you have 4 holes. You want to pass them through the outer holes. Take the acrylic bearing mounts, like that, and you want to secure them with an M3 nut. You want to do that for all 4 mounts. Like so. So I'll go ahead and do that and then get on to the next stage. And once you've finished, you'll have the 4 bearing mounts and the belt mount in place. What you want to do is set the bearing housings onto the bearings, like so. Then you want to take your zip tie, bring it up through the other holes and just secure it in place like that. And repeat that for the other three. So pass the zip tie through, over the bearing, and back up through the bearing mount. Secure it in place. You can see it secures the build plate to the bearings like that. Finish off the other side. Once you've got all four bearings secured, just ensure that they're seated properly. And check that the build platform moves freely. Then you can take a pair of pliers and just tighten up each of the zip ties. Make sure that you've got good grip on the bearings. Once you tighten them up, just check again that the bearings are firmly seated. And the build platform moves, and then you can trim off the excess on the zip ties. And that's this part done. We will be lubricating the rods later on, so you shouldn't get too much noise once that's done. And so there we have the build plate completed. For the next part, you're going to need the Y-axis belt, which is L1 775mm, 2 times M3 times 10mm screws, and 2 times M3 washers, and the previously assembled Y-axis frame. You'll also need a drill with a 2mm bit or similar equipment to make a hole in the belt, and you'll need scissors to trim it off at the end. Okay, for this stage you're going to need the Y-axis belt, so we'll take that out first. You want to tip the Y-axis frame over, rest it down on the desk. You want to take your belt, and the first thing you're going to want to do is just make sure it fits. So fold it in half, and it should be longer than the Y frame, which ours is. And you want to take one end and drill a hole small enough to take the M3 screw. You want to do it about half an inch down from the top of the belt in the center. Just like that. Take one of your M3 screws, you want to feed it in through the hole, but before you do, make sure that you have the hole on the idler side of the frame. And you want to make sure that you feed the belt through in the correct way so it engages with the motor. Okay, so you want to take the M3 washer and the M3 screw and place that through the hole that you made in the belt. And you want to feed that through the hole in the belt that you made, like that, and screw that end into the belt mount on the bottom of the plate. You might want to loosen off the idler wheel for this part, and you want to feed the belt through. You want to feed it through so that the teeth side is facing upwards. Feed it through. And then tighten up the idler wheel again. Then you want to bring it round the pulley on the motor. And you want to pull it so it's tight, but not too tight, not too loose, so it's jumping over the pulley. And you can check that just by moving the belt, and the pulley should move with it. So once you've got your spot where you want to drill your second hole through, go ahead and do that. And you want to take your other M3 screw, pass it through the belt, place it around the pulley, again checking it's not twisted, and secure that to the other side of the belt mount. Once you tighten up the screws, you want to just check that movement is fluid. Both the idler roller and the pulley on the motor are moving freely with the belt. And there should be some play in the belt, but not too much, and it shouldn't be too loose. And once you're happy with that, you can just trim off the excess with a pair of scissors. Just leave a little bit of an overhang. And there we have it. The belt's fitted. Again, just check the movement. Check the belt's running freely, and that's that part complete. For the next section, you're going to need the Y-axis stop switch. It's the one with the two orange wires. 2 times M2.5 times 16mm screws, 2 times M2.5 nuts, and 2 times M2.5 washers, and the previously assembled Y-axis. Okay, for the next part we're going to be fitting the Y-axis stop switch, which is this piece here, and that's going to be fitted in place on here like that. You can see the little L cup it fits on. All we need to do is screw it into place with M2.5 screws and M2.5 nuts. There is an easier way of doing it. What you need to do is take the 2 screws and feed them through the switch, and just put the nuts on so they're just engaging. What you need to do is just slide that into place and hold it steady. And just tighten up the screws. Like that. And you just want to just adjust it slightly so it's flush, and then tighten back up again. Remember not to tighten up too much because you don't want to crack the acrylic, but just enough so that you know it's going to be secure. And that's simply all we have to do. Just make sure that the cable's not in any danger of being nipped or trapped. And that's that part done. For the next part you'll need acrylic pieces A1, A2 and A3, 6 times M3 by 16mm screws, and 6 times M3 square nuts. Okay, so to start with, we start with the main face of the printer, which is acrylic piece number 1. I've left the protective backing on these pieces so you can see it, how it goes together a little bit more easily, because the colour black is quite difficult for showing up detail. You can tell the front of this piece because the fan housing will be to the left hand side. Now if we take acrylic piece number 3, you can see that that has several slots down the side, whereas A2 has almost a complete solid body. A3 goes to the back right hand side of A1. And piece A2 goes to the left hand side and fits in the same way. Both pieces can only fit in one way. And that's the main part of the body of the 3D printer put together. You can see down the side there's the recesses for the square nuts. There's 3 in total. And on the front you can see screw holes corresponding to those recesses. So I'll go ahead and put this together. And once you've fixed the parts together and tightened up the screws, that's this part done, and you can now see the main body put together. For the next part you'll need the small body fan, 4 times M3 by 30mm screws, 4 times M3 hex nuts, and the previous assembled front panel. This part's pretty simple. You just have to take the fan that fits onto the front of the case and take it round the back. Fit it there, taking note of the position of the cable. As you can see, it's in the upper right hand corner, and the label of the fan is facing backwards. Then it's just simply take your 4 M3 screws, and fix the fan to the front panel. Just put them in place with the M3 hex nuts. Finger tight to begin with, and do that on each of the screws. And then just tighten up the screws. And that's this part completed. For the next part you're going to need acrylic pieces A04, A05, 3 times A06 and A07. You're also going to need 10 times M3 by 16mm screws and 10 times M3 square nuts and the previously assembled front panel. This part is the motor mount for the Z axis, and as you can see there's one for each side of the main frame. The left hand side is slightly different as it uses that piece instead of two A6s. I've left the protective backing on so you can see a little bit more clearly, but simply fits together like so, and the right hand side one fits together exactly the same way. And then they simply attach to the front panel on either side. Like that. So I'll go ahead and fix them together now, and then I'll take you through the mounting process. So first we'll do the left hand side. So you want to orientate 0,4 in that manner with the large slot to the left hand side. Place in the side piece with the long tail, like that. Then you want to fix it in place with a square nut. And an M3 screw through the front. Finger tight. And then take the other side and place that with another square nut, and another M3 screw. And what you do is tighten them up. There you have the left hand mount complete, and just do the same with the right hand side. And there you have the two mounts put together. And the next stage is to fit these to main frame, like that. Okay, so fitting these can be a little bit awkward. So the tip is to take some tape one side, put in the square nut, and tape the other side. So the square nut is kept in place by the tape, and then you can simply place it in position and then secure it. and then you can secure it with the M3 screws. One on the inside of the frame is probably the most difficult to secure. You should be able to tighten it up. And there you have it. So the left side done, and repeat exactly the same on the right hand side. And that's the mounts in place. Secure. At this point you can just go around and check all the screws on the front panel, make sure they're all nice and tight. And that's this stage done. So you've now got the two mounts securely in place, and we can move on to the next stage.